In a world where politics feels more confusing and divisive than ever, can technology, specifically AI, be the solution we've all been waiting for? Her name is Vienna Mott, and she's the CEO of Poliquicks, a platform using AI to cut through the noise and deliver the facts you need to stay informed.
One of the biggest things that we need AI for is to write everything at an 11th grade level. A lot of people say, I don't vote because I don't want to make the wrong choice.
In this episode, you discover how AI is simplifying politics, how misinformation is being tackled, and how you can stay informed without the overwhelm. So, before we jump in, I just want to say this. 79% of you watching haven't hit that subscribe button yet. So, if you've ever found value in this podcast, subscribing is one of the best ways to support us. It helps us grow the channel, reach more founders like you, and bring on even bigger guests to share their insights. How did your background in biomedical and mechanical engineering influence your approach to building a platform that promotes civic engagement? What unique technical insights help you make civic education more accessible?
Yeah, I think that my hard skills from engineering probably didn't transfer too much, but a lot of the skills I gained from being in corporate, nonprofits, startups in all different sectors, I think was really helpful. From a young age, I've always enjoyed business, but I think that I understood also from a young age that I really needed to get a technical skill down and really experience work in that and then be able to gain the other skills. So there was a period where I took on a lot of finance work at work. I don't love finance at all. I really quite the opposite. But I knew that to be a good leader of a company, I would need to have a lot of these other skills, a lot of presenting and speaking and writing and reading and things that just come with corporate experience that were really helpful. But it's not like I'm pipetting on a daily basis or anything like that. But I certainly have enjoyed the transition. I think that it felt natural at this point in my life.
So, have you always wanted to found a company?
Yes and no. I think that because of the family and background I came from, I was always very passionate about politics, but I didn't come from a super privileged background either, where it seemed possible for me to start a business right away. So I really had to wait till a point in my life where it made sense for me to be able to take the leap, both from time and the financial commitment that it takes to start a company.
Definitely. So, AI plays an important role in the future of education and civic engagement. How are you using AI in Poliquicks to empower users to engage more effectively with political processes, and how do you ensure that this technology remains ethical and transparent?
Yeah, and that's probably our most common question because AI is seen as such it's a hit or miss depending on who we talk to right now, and it can be a little bit taboo. We only provide factual information. I believe it was Meta that tried to do this maybe 10 years ago, and they put a ton of money towards it, and it just wasn't possible without AI. It's really hard to gather factual information, a lot of it. And specifically in our use case, we're gathering factual political information on all different kinds of websites and from different sources. And then we also still have to go and hand gather some of that data. And so to do it all by hand would be very, very time consuming. And then we're reading things and summarizing them and doing our best to try to filter through all of that noise, which is a really big challenge. And so the sources that we use are all factual, things like congress.gov. You can't really debate too hard whether or not a bill passed. So we tried to pick things like that where people wouldn't necessarily look at it and say, oh, this must be biased. We're just providing factual information through those things. We also have data partners like US Votes Foundation provides ballot measures for us. We have a few other partners providing things like Supreme Court cases. And so we have a lot of data in the app, but it's coming from factual sources almost entirely. I think that it's very common to hear AI and think, oh, misinformation. This is definitely not going to be factual, or I'm concerned about there being bias in here. And so we've spent a lot of time and we have reviewers on the team making sure that all the data is accurate and nonpartisan. But of course, you have to do your best with that. And I think that a news site, we all know, has just some inherent bias for the most part. Some are considered to be more trustworthy than others, but that's why we're really stuck to factual information.
So, you make sure that the inputs are unbiased and make sure they're from neutral sources, and you also make sure that the output is unbiased and you have someone check every time.
Yeah. Yeah, so it is quite a bit of work, but having AI help, one of the biggest things that we need AI for is to write everything at an 11th grade level, because that was our user testing deemed that was appropriate for people being able to understand, but also not think that this is a fifth grade app. So that's really one of the biggest benefits, being able to get everything in the right format and when you're pulling from different sources, and then being able to make sure that it's all consistent in the level that it's reading at.
Definitely. So you've spoken about closing the gap between elected officials and constituents. What features of Poliquicks specifically addresses this issue? And how do you see tech enabling more effective communication between these two groups?
Yeah, so we do a lot of interviews on both sides. We work with elected officials, we also work with reps, and then we work with constituents and of various ages. We partner with high schools and colleges, we work with communities and companies. So we get a lot of feedback and a lot of opinions on what kind of is going through their head. A lot of people will say, I don't vote because my vote doesn't matter. But when we talk about the local elections, a lot of people say, I don't vote because I don't want to make the wrong choice, which it's a very fair feeling, but it's something that we really can combat. And that little white pamphlet that they send out to try to help you choose who you're voting for, it's not necessarily interesting. And so if you're already not very interested in politics or really understand what you're voting for or what that could impact, you're probably not going to go read that. And so we spend a lot of time talking about these are the issues that can be affected, especially at the local level, that you may have an opinion on. If you don't like a pothole, there's something you can do about it. And I know that a lot of times we focus on what the federal government is doing and how we don't really have an impact there, it feels often. And so we really encourage people to vote at their local elections and make change in their communities where it impacts them quite often. So in the app, when candidates give us their stances, or elected officials, of course, they can earn a transparency badge. And so that's something that our users then know that they've provided their stances, they've reviewed them, and they're comfortable with what's shared there. I think that's made a really big difference. The other thing is our home feed allows you to look at 6 to 7 items a day that matter to you. So when you first join the app, you can add at least 3 topics that you care about. And these range everything from abortion to healthcare to taxes. So these are all things that people talk about a lot, but it can be hard to gather all that information and track it in one place. So you can see bill action, executive orders. There's some polls and quizzes to make it a little more fun. So we try to just give you really what you need to know. If you were to watch the news for only 5 minutes, but not be news and it just be factual, that's what you would get.
Because I feel like news can be so polarizing. And it's like the kind of thing that when you watch, you are not really in a good mood afterwards. So if there was something factual to make sure that you're informed and that you make better decisions, that's very cool.
Yeah, and it can be hard because I don't watch much TV, but every time I turn on the TV, I think I see the same 2 ads one's for a candidate, one's for a ballot measure. And I see them, I probably recite them. I've seen them so many times. And so it's hard to be stuck seeing that. I don't really want to see that anymore. I've seen it so many times. I understand there are things to vote for, but there's not really much about your local elections, or if there are, they tend to be more of smear campaigns or negative things. And so I don't really understand what someone is running on. I just know that this other person is bad. And I think that's something that it does put you in a bad mood naturally, because it's a really negative thing to watch. And some of them are, maybe a little funny, but generally I'm not this again.
In a way, this app, it helps people vote less for personal interest and then vote more for policies, right? So like less for the polarization and more for what they'll actually do.
Yeah, we have a quiz in the app, and this was actually our flagship feature where you swipe on stances and you match with different candidates according to their stances, not their party line, which is really helpful because if you live in a state where they don't declare or there are several candidates in the same party, often we go into our polling location and then we get in the booth and we think, oh my gosh, I don't know any of these people, so I guess I'll just pick all the same party and go down the whole line. But that doesn't necessarily, not that's against what you believe, but you really don't know if it is because you're just guessing. And we just want people to have, it's less than a 5-minute quiz to be able, you can do it when you're in line, to be able to stand there and feel confident when you walk out, that excuse of I made a mistake in voting or I did the wrong thing, that's not really there anymore. And I think that even if that's the only thing someone uses the app for, it's still a really valuable tool for them.
So in developing Poliquicks, how have you designed the app to not only educate users, but to also drive active participation in civic processes? What technological challenges have you faced in building a tool that balances education and action?
Yeah, it's very tricky. I think that we have our Duolingo aspects. We have a whole Learn tab where you do different learning modules and we encourage people to try to learn more. And then you're right, there are action-based items where we say, okay, you've learned, but also if you want to make a difference, you do have to do something. And there are petitions out there, town hall meetings, school board meetings, and Generally, the position that I've taken personally and as a vision for the company is there are a lot of organizations out there that encourage you to vote, and they tell you to register to vote, and they help you. And we remind you that if you can vote, you should register and that you should try to participate in some kind of civic engagement. But for the most part, our business isn't really founded on whether or not, if someone votes or not, it doesn't change whether or not we see success. We really only benefit off of them being educated. And of course, we encourage civic participation, but we think that just using education as a basis will be encouragement in and of itself. And so we want people to understand why it matters and then choose to go out and do those things because it matters. And we find that then people hopefully will have a little bit better discourse in these different meetings. I know that school board meetings in some places have gotten very intense, and that's a big thing that people talk about these days, that they're very political now and they're very overwhelming. In some ways, that's good because people are participating, but I think that often we lose the reminder of the importance that we're trying to come to a solution where most people are mostly happy. You don't always get your way 100%, and it's frustrating. And I think that can be really hard for people to accept, especially if they're doing the quote right thing and going out and participating, then they don't get what they want. It's extremely frustrating. And that's why on the other side, we encourage these elected officials to be very candid about their stances and what they're able to impact, so people aren't feeling like they're misled and thinking, oh, I thought you were going to fix all my potholes if I went to a town hall meeting and you didn't, and now what a waste of my time. And so we're constantly encouraging them to understand really what the impact they can make is and be realistic about that so that they do feel like they've made a difference.
So you've had a successful career as a woman in STEM, and now you're applying this to civic tech. What barriers did you face in transitioning from engineering to building a political education platform? And how do you see women shaping the future of civic engagement through tech?
Yeah, I think engineering as a woman may have been harder. I'm still earlier in the political world than I was in engineering, so maybe I'll change my mind eventually. But when I was in grad school, especially for mechanical engineering, sometimes I'd be the only woman in my class. Sometimes there were two of us if I was lucky. And often in work, in bio-facing projects, there would be more women because there are more women in biomedical engineering and biology in general. But when I was working on the more mechanical side, often it would be a team of men. And I think that I would say that I haven't had a huge, I don't think there have been some times where it's been difficult for me and there has certainly been a barrier. Otherwise, the way I was raised, I think my mom really, and I was in a single parent household most of my life. And my mom really encouraged, no, boys can't do things better, that kind of thing. And you can, even though I was terrible at sports, go play with the boys, who cares? And I think that was really good for me to experience. I went to an all-girls high school. So when I went to college for undergrad, it was very, very, I had never had a boy space friend in my whole life. And so I was like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. They actually have the same interests as I do. And so I think it was easier for me entering the workforce, realizing that I actually have a lot of more traditionally boy kind of interests. I was good at math and I like cars and I like all these things that the boys like. And so I think that from the kind of like camaraderie stance, it wasn't so bad. Leadership wise, I think it was very important for me to seek out both a female and a male mentor early on in my companies and try to, for the female sense, understand like, I don't want people thinking that I'm getting a promotion because I'm a woman and they have to check a box. But also, is there a way that I could use that to my advantage where I say, I don't want you to look at me differently, but I also want you to understand that if you have this internal bias, that it might not be fair, that it's all men in leadership positions here. And so really trying to break through that can be tricky. But I think that the women that I've had as mentors throughout the years have just been so strong and really encouraging and didn't make me feel like I couldn't move on to the next level. And if I couldn't, it didn't feel like it was because I was a woman. I'd say in politics, there are a lot more women. And I have a mentor as well who's another female founder who's more senior than I am. And she gives advice on some of these things sometimes. So I think overall, there is definitely, of course, a gap that exists just in a lot of these leadership roles, especially. But I think that I'm pretty comfortable working with men and not feeling smaller because, and I think that when I mentor other young women, I try to encourage a lot of, if someone interrupts you, you should finish what you have to say if it's important and you should feel like you have a voice. But also you don't always need to be the loudest voice just to try to cut through. Like you can be very impactful with what you do through your hard work and it will show.
So you've some very strong mentors from your mother to leaders in different companies. Yeah, and I think that touches on a really important point. I feel like mentors have a huge impact on our lives and also especially our parents as well. I feel like having a mom that supports you and just tells you different things, I feel like that would you say that has made a huge impact on you?
Yeah, when I was 5, my mom said I could be anything I wanted when I grew up, and I said, "Even a monkey?" And she was like, "Yeah, sure." And I think that's the biggest thing that you can do for somebody, especially a young girl, is if they want to do something, yeah, it's unreasonable that I would be a monkey, but I didn't know the difference, and I wasn't really going to try, and so why not let me feel like I could do really whatever? And I think that's really important, and so when I talk to young girls especially, and we talk about what do you want to be when you grow up, or do you know what you want to do after high school as they're getting older? And we start to talk about it. I spend a lot of time usually saying, I know that there are traditional roles or jobs that you may have seen from your family members or your friends or other people in your circle. And that's great if you want to do that. But if you want to do something different, we can try to pair you up with someone. You can shadow them at work for a day and think, oh, no, I don't want to do that. Or you might really love it. And I think just keeping that door really open from a young age is very important.
Definitely. I feel like representation is very important. I feel like girls, they see it when they see someone who's an example, who is a woman in a male dominated industry. I feel like that's really inspiring to them. And yeah, I think a lot of people don't have that role models in the beginning.
Yeah, and also one of the things I experienced was in engineering school, I found out that a lot of the boys that I went to school with, they had a dad or a family member who was an engineer, and I didn't know a single engineer. And so they had help getting internships and help knowing which classes to take and things like that. And I was just guessing. I knew I wanted to be a biomedical engineer, and I had to work really hard to get these internships. I worked in a lab that maybe I shouldn't say this on here, but I really did not enjoy that at all for that period of time. And then I took a free internship after that. And then I was able to get one. And some of these people, they'd go and work at their dad's company. And I think that there was a period where maybe I was a little more bitter when I was younger, thinking, I have to take an unpaid internship. I need money. And then getting older and realizing that, I don't know, I would probably do the same thing for my kid if I had one. So it's hard to cut through that because the reality is people will try to help out people that they know or that they care about. And when I'm mentoring someone, I'm always trying to help them out. And so I think that there's really this difficult imbalance of trying to, you know, I guess resolve this. You want to help people you care about. Traditionally, just a lot of them have been boys and men. And so they've done that. And so to cut through that whole barrier is very difficult. And even then, the interest in AI is an emerging field. They thought that it would be equal 50-50 boys and girls at these younger ages and then men and women. And they're seeing similar to computer science rates. So they're seeing far fewer women. And I don't think it's because women are bad at AI or don't know what AI is. I think that it's just the mentors of the boys and men who have experienced a lot more in their careers tend to recommend that they go for these things because they make a lot more money or because their careers could be more successful. And that's why when I do mentor girls and women, I'm always trying to think of options that basically I'm interested in, I don't know, medical stuff. Then I'm like, okay, do you like animals? Do you like people? Do you like old people? And trying to think about all the different careers in there. And you don't just have to be a nurse or a doctor. There are so many other options. I think that's the most important thing that you can do as a mentor, especially for younger girls, because they may have not seen representation in these jobs. And even if they do have a dad who is an engineer and they don't want to be an engineer, they actually might be interested in a STEM field, but they just don't know what's out there.
Yeah, I feel like just honestly, just by putting yourself out there like you are, I feel like you're already going to be inspiring young girls who want to pursue a similar path.
I sure hope so. We often say that we're fighting AI with AI. I think the thing to always keep in mind here that sometimes people lose sight of when they start to have really strong feelings about AI is that there's really nothing that we can do to stop it and stop misinformation in and of itself. It's going to keep happening. It will keep spreading. This was always an issue when the internet was first became very popular in the .com era and all of that. People had their own fears that were not that different from where we are now. Of course, now we have a lot of tech unleashed very fast, and there are a lot of great things that can come out of it. But there's also the obvious nefarious actors and bad things that come out of it. And so the more that we don't shy away from AI and get our younger people and students engaged in understanding what misinformation looks like, how to find good sources, how to fact check, and media literacy in general. These things are maybe less important in the past when there was one newspaper and have become increasingly important over time. And we really spend a lot of time trying to explain that. And one of the analogies I use often is that teachers used to say, don't use a calculator in the school because you can't have that in real life. That's not true. I use a calculator almost every day. I use a computer to do math almost every day. I'm always doing that. And it doesn't mean I can't add or count money or do math in my head, and you should learn those things. But I think it's very important to acknowledge that if the tool is going to be there in their day-to-day life, that they should learn how to use it and they should be comfortable with it. Even if it's maybe they don't want them writing essays with AI, fine. I understand that. But then we have to be more creative as a nation in the assignments we're giving people so that they're not cheating. Instead of calling it cheating, allow them to use it as a tool in the same way they would use, cite any other source or use Google or something like that. I really think that a lot of the fear around AI comes from a lack of understanding and just a fear of having what people would call, I don't have a really nice way to put this, like dumb kids. You get like a lot of that rhetoric now. And I'm like, they're just differently equipped and maybe they don't the same way they used to. Maybe their cursive is really bad, but I don't know. I think that we're facing this tipping point as a nation where we all have to be really honest about that and think, is cursive, I can still write in cursive. I think it was a great thing. But is that more important if you have an hour in school than learning AI? And I don't really know the right answer to that. It's tough. And I would say that many schools would argue that AI is more important, but there are people that would argue cursive is more important. And I think that it does matter the environment you're in, the jobs you might want, where you live. And unfortunately, that really does divide us as a nation over time. And we see it pretty regularly because we partner with high schools. And some of them are like, AI, yes, we would love to adopt that in any way we can. That would be great for our students. And some say, oh, you have to come and talk to the parents first, and we have to have a discussion and make sure there's no misinformation in here. And so I think that is really causing the AI divide is really going to make a big difference in where we are in 10 years from now when there are some kids who are just extremely proficient, and I guess they'll be maybe even adults at that point, and some who have never really used a tool or don't really understand how to identify hallucinations. And I've said this before too, it's like giving my grandma a cell phone 20 years after we all got one. It's a big learning curve, and there's a lot to learn there. But there's also something to be said about the handwritten letters she sends. I think that it's a really tough trade-off.
Yeah, honestly, it is tough. I feel like if I was a young girl right now and I'm studying, it would be really hard, especially if you have to follow the regulations of the school. And also, if you're interested in using AI, it seems really something difficult to grapple with. But also, I completely agree with you in terms of how students should really learn how to use AI, otherwise they'll be behind.
Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of streamlining tools come out where you don't really need to be a super expert to do well with using AI. I think the bigger concern is really just understanding the information that you're being given and where it's coming from and how to tell if something doesn't look right. Because that's really the big difference. If I know that 2 + 2 is 4 and I type it into a calculator, I already know that. I know that seems right. And if you're using AI and you don't really understand the core information, then yeah, you might put in 2 + 2 and get 6 and say, yeah, sure. And so being able to recognize that difference of, oh, this doesn't look right. And that's what we do on a daily basis. We get information that comes from AI, we reread it and we say, that looks a little too long or a little too short, or that doesn't look like an 11th grade level. For the most part, it doesn't happen, but every once in a while we'll look at something and think, oh no, and I think that's what the skill that we want people to really be able to have more than anything.
Definitely. So since your launch of Poliquicks, your personal story from inventing at a young age to helping your family shows a deep commitment to making a difference. How has your early life experience shaped your desire to increase civic engagement, and how do you stay connected to that mission?
I grew up in a very politically charged family. We used to have a lot of political discourse, and I run a nonpartisan app. So without anything that gives away party affiliations, former, present, anything like that, I was pretty involved in a lot of clubs. And so I was secretary or whatever of something, and this is hard to evade those details. And so we were always talking about politics. it ended up getting to a point where we had a lot of trouble having these conversations in my family. So we don't really talk about politics and actually politics and religion now at my family gatherings, because it used to turn into people sending a bunch of articles that were from various sources with very polarizing headlines and often very offensive things in the headlines that are, and you fight over a headline, and that's a summary of an article that's already an opinion. And so I just wanted to be able to gather facts. And I often compare it to, if somebody said the Atlantic Ocean was the best ocean on the planet, you would think, why do you have an opinion on that? And then you'd want to talk about it. You'd be like, do you need to have an opinion on that? Can I do something about that? Was there like a running poll that's going on that I'm missing out on? And so I would often get very frustrated, because I think that having those political discussions are really important to shaping your beliefs. It's the same way as watching the news or social media. It is important to understand why other people feel the way they do, but being able to take a step back and, rather than fight for what you believe is right, and really understand why somebody else might not want the same thing, is way more valuable than fighting for something. Like, if you already believe it, you don't need to convince yourself. You will never convince the other person by yelling at them. And, really just taking a step back and being like, why do you think that tax dollars should be allocated to this more than this? And sometimes people don't have an answer because they don't really understand. And sometimes people have a very good answer and you think, that makes sense. And for example, when I talked about the potholes, if somebody were to say, I don't want the potholes on my street fixed, you would be like, why? They're the worst thing ever. Nobody likes that. And then if you find out that the person with the opinion is a 16-year-old without a car and they walk every day, you'd be like, oh, okay, now I understand. Let me explain why somebody might care about that. And you have a conversation that way, rather than screaming at them that potholes are the worst thing to ever exist on the planet. And I think that kind of ability, really, it's really difficult to do that. It's hard to listen to somebody say something, especially on topics where we're really passionate, and then let someone else have a different opinion and be so confident in it. It's difficult to hear at times, especially if it contradicts your personal lifestyle or beliefs or way of life. But we're trying as a country generally, and this is the whole overarching goal of politics, especially in the US, to make it a better place for everyone and make it more equitable and find ways for everyone to be maybe a little more happy. But you just can't get everyone at 100% of happiness. And so being able to really think about, and this is one of the things we do with Poliquicks, we get people to understand what issues are most important to them. And I think that can also be a really good way of finding some kind of middle ground where you say, okay, maybe I don't get what I want on this thing, but that's not really as important to me as this thing. And so I'm going to stand up for that, because nobody has time to sit around and advocate for 50 different issues that they probably don't care about, like 40 of them. And we want people to understand these are the things you can impact and which of these are most important.
Definitely. I feel like there's no conversation if you start to argue with someone. Honestly, I think that's something you learn as you grow up. I've used to have like very heated conversations with my cousins on like different issues, but now that I'm like more mature, I'm just like, okay, you have this opinion, I have this opinion. That's fine. We can just leave it at that. I respect that. And they might not respect this, and I don't even need to say it out loud because no one's going to change anyone's opinion.
And the only way that you really can is by having conversations where you understand that people are people and they want these things for very personal reasons, and being able to really fact check yourself and be honest and think, is this, especially with elected officials and candidates, they are not your family member. You don't have to agree with them on everything. You don't need to back them up in everything. And you don't need to be their biggest fan. And this is like a complete across the spectrum thing. It's certainly not towards one party or the other or one group or another. It's like people just tend to do that. They think, I need to back this person wholly, or else it's going to look like there are holes in our argument and our party is weak or something like that. And I don't think that's true at all. I think it's very okay to say, I love my mayor, and I think that their beliefs are generally what I believe in, but actually their belief on this thing is very, on healthcare or something, I don't know, is very different than what I believe. And then you might think, okay, they don't really do a lot with healthcare, so maybe I don't care. Or maybe they're the hugest advocate of healthcare, and now I'm wondering if I really voted for the right person. And I think that it's very hard for us to, it's not even admitting you're wrong, but it can feel that way. But just to be able to really fact check yourself and be that responsible person when it feels like no one else is trying, whether that's true or not, it can often feel that way. So it's definitely a really tough world that we're in these days. So if you've broken barriers in both STEM and now civic tech,
What's the most important lesson you've learned about perseverance, especially when working on a mission-driven company?
Yeah, I think that it is very discouraging running a company at times, just broadly, and especially in this world. We're at the intersection of politics, education, and AI, which is, if you were to draw a Venn diagram with the center being don't do that, this is probably like the most, like this would be the textbook picture of it, because it's just impossibly hard. Ed tech is underfunded, politics is political, and AI is super taboo still. And so you're constantly being just grilled with questions that feel so one step up from demeaning. But it can be really frustrating because you have this altruistic mission. You're like, I'm trying to put facts into the world and that's it. I'm not even trying to give an opinion. I go so far out of my way to not give an opinion. And then people to come in and look at the app and respond with such skepticism, which I mean, I think skepticism is a responsible reaction, but it can be really gutting when you hear it often. And those conversations always end really well, but it takes a lot of time sometimes to really get people to understand what their concern is, because I don't think people always understand it. And so if someone says they're worried about AI, then I have to break down, why are you worried? And I'll explain what we do. But then it usually turns into a longer conversation about just the future of AI in general and those types of things. And so it can be really exhausting to sit on calls for a chunk of a day. But then on the flip side, many more days, that's such a minority of my time. So many more times I have a conversation and someone's really excited, or they're really passionate, or they think what we're doing is great, or they have a connection and they're super excited to share it. And those, I think, keep me motivated a lot. And also just knowing that if you set out to do something and you really do your best on it, then you will have natural followers and people will love the mission and some people won't. And just remembering that you don't need to convince every single person. I think my sister and I once had a funny conversation. We're both autistic. And she was telling me that somebody was saying that autism comes from vaccines and that's how she got it. And she said, I genuinely do not believe that. And I know that this could be potentially a little bit controversial, and I'll leave my opinions out of this, of course. And I said, but it's not your job to convince somebody that. If they believe that, that's fine. And if you were to sit in a room with every autistic person in the country and they said, raise your hand or point to the person that you believe has to change the perception of this, nobody would point to you except yourself. And I think that it's important to remember that if you're doing something that's mission driven, that some people will like your mission, some won't, but it's not your job to change everyone's opinion. It's your job to keep pursuing your mission and allowing people to hopefully understand it and want to join it. But forcing someone, that hasn't worked out super well in history. So that's certainly not where I'm trying to go.
Yeah, I really that mindset because it's also like how no one will like us, right? We can't make everyone like us. And the more we try to convince everyone to like us, the less people will like us. So actually, yeah, so I think I listened to something recently and they were like, the less you try to make other people like you and the more you focus on your mission, people actually start to respect you when you stop trying so hard.
Yeah, and it can be really hard. It's hard to, if you have 100 people say yes and one say no, it's so easy to focus on that one. But frankly, it's often a waste of your time because you just have 100 people that might be interested in a sale or whatever your business is. And then you have one person. If 100 people are saying no and one is saying yes, you should probably do some customer discovery and user testing and make sure you're doing something that people want. But unless you're really going for something that's for a super minority. But generally, if most people are on your side and they're excited, you should really lean into that and build your customer base, because that one person, they may be a natural conversion later anyway. And it's not a bad thing to use your time to try to have that conversation and understand what some of the critics or skeptics might be thinking, because sometimes it's as easy as just we have all of our, or not all, but everything that's not proprietary, our general way that we operate, and we try to be very transparent on our website. And so that was something that came out of all these conversations which again, were probably way like 20% of max of the conversations we had, but people just saying, I really would like to understand more where you're getting your data or how you're ensuring that it's factual. And so we just put it on the website and then we move on. And if that's not good enough, then I don't know, they can call us or they don't have to use the app, and hopefully they'll start to understand what we're trying to do and how we're doing it. And over time, maybe they'll be more comfortable. But some people just aren't first adopters, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think early adopters, that's like only a few like kind of percentage of people who would want to adopt new technology. I'm in that group. I love adopting new things. I feel like when something comes out, if it's new, I'm like signing up right away, and I don't even care if it works or not. I'm just like, okay, I just want to see what it does.
I know, and I think I think it's a mindset thing too, where there are just some people that are so excited about technology and they just want to know what's going on and be able to keep up and stay ahead of trends. And then there's some people that are like, I'm gonna wait until this is proven out, or I'm gonna wait to buy this until I know that it's not going to set on fire or whatever it is. But I think it's just a personality thing, but you can't change someone's personality.
So, as the founder of a company dedicated to increasing civic engagement, how do you balance the pressures of entrepreneurship with your drive to create a social impact? What keeps you focused in your vision even when challenges arise?
I'd say some overlap with what I was just talking about. I think that there are so many challenges that come up, and I think there can be a lot of competition in this space from what I've experienced. And I really am always calling people asking if they want to partner, if they want to do a guest blog or a webinar. I think that it's really important that no one's really been able to crack this younger generation civic engagement thing. They've cracked the getting them to register to vote, but that's where some of those organizations mission ends, or where it drops off, because then they get people to register to vote. They go once every 4 years at most, and that's kind of it. And I think that there is a difficulty in running a business where you feel pressure to be a successful business owner, but also when there is a mission behind it and it's very altruistic and a little bit wishful thinking at times, balancing those two things and thinking that it really is possible. I don't think there's a world where you can easily have a for-profit company in this space and not have to make those considerations of, I love my mission, I love my business, I want my business to succeed so I can further my mission. And that's really the mindset I have. But I'm sure there are people on the flip side who say, no, this should always be a nonprofit. A nonprofit is not all that different. There are plenty of very wealthy nonprofit owners, and we're not doing this just because we want the big paychecks. It made sense for us to be a for-profit for legal reasons and business reasons. But I know that there can be a little bit of a slant in the way people view it. And I think sometimes people in this area go as nonprofits because it's an optics thing. And I've been super candid on the Poliquicks TikTok. I've been posting videos about our business journey and just what it's been like getting here. From my experience, I have two co-founders, and we have a COO who's full-time and he's great. And we have a few other employees who are full-time or nearly full-time. We have a bunch of volunteers and interns, and I'm sure that they have different experiences in some ways. But I've always been very candid about, this is why we started as an LLC. That was recommended to us. We ended up incorporating later. That was recommended to us. And learning about these things, because there really isn't anywhere to understand a lot of how to run business. But in some of my videos, I talk about this challenge of, you want to be a good business owner. I want to be a good CEO. I want my team to like me. And that's a natural thing that I don't think many people are super honest about. It's hard to be a leader and lead and be liked. And when you're liked, people do better work and they're excited to work for you. And so really trying to strike that balance. And one way that I found that generally the kind of common ground of this business entrepreneurship sort of success on both sides is that we're developing an app for younger people. A lot of the people working on the app are younger. We text to communicate. I try to avoid meetings when I can. I try to create a really healthy company culture. Generally, our team is just really fun. And I think that when everyone is excited about the mission to the point that they'll intern and want to and come and find us, it's so amazing. I think that the business naturally will succeed. And I would say that I don't spend most of my time thinking about one or the other. They're always tied together for me. It's always, if we can get an extra connection, that means we can further our mission. And so I'm always we have a mission statement. I read it quite often and I think about it. And when I make business decisions, I'll have a call with anyone and I'll talk to anyone that seems like they might be interested. But when we have to come down to the decision point, does it follow the mission? Does it make sense for the business? If it's not a yes to both, that's a really tough sell and probably a no for me.
Able to share your mission statement?
Yes, but I have to pull it up. We rewrote it. So I'll read the newer one, although I'll read the older one because that's the one that will be on the website first. Poliquicks is a nonpartisan political education startup dedicated to making politics more accessible, transparent, and engaging. Our mission is to eliminate barriers between people and politics by providing objective, easy to understand information. Using AI and gamification, we aim to create a better informed electorate. By leveraging unbiased data sources and innovative AI-driven techniques, Poliquicks offers the most accurate and simplified political information available. We strive to make politics accessible to everyone, regardless of education, language, location, or socioeconomic status. Our vision is for people across the nation to use Poliquicks not just to stay informed, but to learn about their representatives, feel empowered at the polls, and drive meaningful change in their communities. It's pretty lengthy, but
Yeah.
we had a lot to say.
I think this is a great note to end the podcast on. Thank you so much, Vienna, for coming and sharing all of your insights. And yeah, I'm so excited to see Poliquicks make more of an impact. And yeah, and just I feel like it will definitely make the electorate more informed.
Yeah, and that's our mission. And yeah, we're on the App Store. So anyone that hears this, feel free to download it and send me your feedback. I'm always taking more and more feedback and taking it all in and thinking about it and trying to make the app better.